be doing chapters 13 through 15 of The Wondrous World of Utopia, written by me. That nice map again. And today, the creature that we're going to discuss is Megacrustacea gargantua. This is the giant emperor crab. He is not a crustacean, despite the Megacrustacea in his name, but instead an alipod. The reason I put Megacrustacea is because I could not find a Greek or Latin word for crab, so I just picked Megacrustacea because it's the closest thing to crab. The closest thing to a Greek or Latin word for crab I could find. But he's not a crustacean, he's an alipod. Crustaceans do not exist on Utopia, but what replaces them are alipods. Billers are one of the creatures in this family that includes ablopods. Not ablopods, alipods. He's the last of his kind, all the other crabs were eaten by megalodons. Because of this, he has grown a extreme hatred toward these creatures. He's essentially the crab version of King Kong, like from the new, the movie with the skull-crawling lizards. They ate his kind and he doesn't like them. It's the same thing with this crab and these mega axolotls. This crab is about 40 feet tall, 60 feet wide, and weighs about 3 tons. Now, originally the idea was about 40 tons, but I then realized that he's a land crab, and crabs with skinny legs that weigh 40 tons would not work. Those legs would snap, so I cut that weight down a little bit to 3 tons from 40 to 60 tons because that's just unreasonable. He lives on Beach Island, also known as the Beachlands, which are these false continents that don't really count as continents because of how small they are. These are all the beach islands. So he lives on Beach Island, which does have a small forest, but it is mostly beach. He has 8 legs, 2 large claws, and 2 eyes on movable stalks on top of his head. Because this crab is a male, he cannot mate, he cannot lay eggs, and he is the last crab of his kind. So once he gets old and dies, this species will be extinct. Wait, oh god, no. That was about to be a spoiler. Let me find it. Once he grows old and dies, wait, they're stuck together. I almost gave you a spoiler twice. Once he grows old and dies, this species will be extinct. He is an omnivore, feeding on plants, fruit, other alipods, and worms. With his large claws, he can pinch down with over 100 tons of force. His favorite thing to do is getting revenge on the megalodons for eating all of his species. His favorite game is using bill worms, which are those dollar bill shaped flatworms that we discussed earlier, as bait to catch them. He doesn't do this for food, even though he will eat them because there's a lot of meat. But the goal of this isn't food. He does this for there's a much more sinister motive. He will first wave the worm around in his claws until the megalodon sees it, and then he will scuttle backward with the worm in his claws. The giant predator will follow him, wanting to get that food. He will keep teasing them like this until he gets to shore. The megalodons will unknowingly follow him onto land, where they will become beached and die. By the time they realize that they are no longer in the water, it'll be too late. I told you he hated these creatures. He has been doing this for hundreds of years, and is very good at it. He has a lifespan of 60,000 years. Chapter 14, Jellyfish Mushrooms. I ran out of ideas for these, so I don't know how practical this is going to be, jellyfish mushrooms, so I hope you enjoy it. Jellyfish mushrooms. I ran out of ideas for the jellyfish mushroom for chapter 14, so I just pushed out a chapter of jellyfish mushrooms, so I hope you enjoy it. Jellyfish mushrooms are a species of predatory fungi. They evolved this way because they need nutrients to produce spores. The mushrooms look a bit like trees, but instead of having branches, they have tentacles with spikes all over them. These mushrooms are on average 20 to 40 feet tall, and they vary in color. They grow in bogs where the soil has few nutrients, and they are native to the palmlands. These fungi are carnivores, feeding on anything they can get their tentacles on. They feed by snatching up prey with their tentacles, and then the fungi... when the fungi get a lot of water, the sharp thorns on the tentacles produce a poison called alpha toxin, a chemical that is not present in any earthly creature or plant. So don't go Googling alpha toxin. It won't get you anywhere. This toxin is 10 times more potent than tetrodotoxin. A single drop of this could kill a T-Rex in as little as 3 hours. A full dose of it, like in a lobster's bite, could kill a blue whale. In the middle of where all the tentacles meet will open up, and the fungi will place the prey into that opening, into that hole. And then the mushroom will then solidify into a wood-like material. And the prey will be stuck in the middle of the fruiting body of the fungus, being slowly digested over time. If the prey is unlucky, the fungi may not be able to produce any alpha toxin that day because it's not wet enough that day, or it's just not raining. So the prey will be digested alive. They must feed for at least 4 years before they have enough stored nutrients to produce spores, which erupt through the same hole that the fungus uses to eat. They only spore when Beacon is in its waxing gibbous phase. And they can produce millions of spores in one night. They have no eyes, but they do have light receptor cells, which allow them to detect Beacon's purple light. Pages stuck together, stuck. Don't you just hate sticky pages? These fungi are eaten by billers, which chop them down quickly before they have time to solidify. They are also immune to alpha toxin. They will stay alive until they release all of the spores. Then the fruiting bodies will melt into a blob of jelly and die. This means that their lifespans are on average pretty short. I didn't even specify a time of how long they live. They're that short. So that wraps up jellyfish mushrooms. And today next we're going to get into something new, because we're going to get into a civilized type of creature like people. So chapter 15 is the bubbleheads. Not the bobbleheads, those are toys. The bubbleheads. Like bubbles that you pop, soap bubbles, those kind of bubbles. The bubbleheads were the only technologically advanced creatures on the entire planet of Utopia, but they have now gone extinct. This is not because of an asteroid or a plague, but because of the billers, which we're going to discuss later. I'm going to leave that as a surprise so you can stay on the edge of your seats until we get to that part, because this is going to be good. They were about 7 to 8 feet tall, and they weighed 70 to 80 pounds. They were tall and thin or skinny, with long arms, sharp clawed fingers, dark blue to burgundy skin with large round bulbous heads, which gave them their names, and 2 eye stalks on the tops of their heads, like those of a slug, because Utopia has no mammals or no mammals or birds. So despite being humanoid, they did not evolve from snails. Wait, they did not evolve from apes, but from snails. And we might discuss that later. Somewhere in here somewhere. They were one of the few vertebrates that were not slimy, like amphipods are slimy, which means that they can travel even to the dry climates without drying out. They lived in Lemonada, Abigalia, and its rainforests, where they built villages and lived in igloo-shaped houses made of metal and wood. These igloos were 3 to 4 stories tall and had elevators between floors. The basements in these houses had burrows in them. Now the reason they had burrows in their basements is because they would raid the worm people's burrows, either forcing them to leave or literally dragging them out of their burrows. They then built their houses right over top of the burrows. The Bubblehead's mindset was that the worm people were dumb and primitive because they lived underground. So, additionally, they could just dig another hole. So basically their mindset was, these things are so primitive because they live underground. They can just, if we kick them out of their house, they don't have to spend money to build a new home. They can just dig another hole in the ground somewhere, and they'll be fine. The Bubbleheads were bigger and more advanced and higher up than the worm people, and they turned a blind eye stalk to the ethical implications of digging up other people's burrows and forcing them out. The Bubbleheads could care less about the fact that even though living in a hole in the ground costs no money, those burrows contain precious memories, years worth of food storage, and other important things. So, we're also getting to a bad start with these Bubbleheads. You're gonna eventually find out that these things are not very nice. Maybe even worse than the Slobsters, I guess. The Bubbleheads also wore clothes made of the skins of the giant leech, the giant Abigalian leech, reinforced with synthetic materials for extra good looks and leatheriness. They wore full-body zip-up suits with openings only for their feet, hands, and heads. They also wore hats that had 2 holes in them so that they could get their eye stalks through them. So they essentially wore onesies all the time, but they're not all fluffy like baby onesies, and they're a lot more mature than a typical onesie, of course. And they're not as fluffy because Abigalia is hot as freak. So they're gonna be, if the onesies that they wore were fluffy, they would be very hot and sweating yep. There's a few problems with this. Bathroom trips would be very hard because they had to unzip the whole suit to go to the bathroom. There was no like pants. It was just one suit. And every night they had to they basically had to have the suit wide open, and then they would put the suit in their bed and they would lay down inside the suit, and then every morning they would get up and zip the suit up and put their eye stalk hats on and go about their Bubblehead day. Just for a quick side note. They laid their eggs in any random spot they could find. They would often forget where they put their eggs. So their species was not off to a good start. They were going extinct. They did go extinct because of the billers, but as far as what they did with their eggs, where they laid eggs and forgot where they put them, their species was off to a very bad start. Because things would eat their eggs, because they wouldn't know where they put them. The bubbleheads were omnivores. Their diet consisted of mushrooms, various plants, and meats. Now, this is the good part, so hold on to your butts, as in Jurassic Park. We will discuss why these creatures are gone. So, when the bubbleheads discovered how fast and powerful the billers were, they started using them to transport goods, a bit like oxen. However, there were some problems with this. The bubbleheads, well, this is kind of out of place. This is just a quick side note. The bubbleheads don't know what dollar bills are. So we call them billers because their brains are shaped like dollar bills and they don't use dollars as currency. But instead, they were called by a different name, Balarusas. In their language, this means very hard-shelled beast. Sometimes the billers did not want to work. They would often roll up into a ball and not move at all. The bubbleheads would never get anything done when this happened. And this would really get on the bubbleheads would never get anything done when this happened, and this would really get on their nerves. So what they started to do was attach hoses to the microphone-shaped tubes called biliary glands, which is the replacement for mammary glands, which produce the rainbow jelly for the biller's eggs, which is known as pre-growth fluid. And then they would use these hoses to spray the biliary glands with extremely hot water, up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Spraying these sensitive organs with near boiling water would be very effective at getting the billers to move, but it would be extremely painful and it would cause long-lasting damage to these glands, such as blisters, swellings, reddening. I don't know if it should be reddening because they don't have red blood, it's orange blood. But yep, reddening the affected glands. Oh, not reddening. Rendering the affected glands unable to produce the pre-growth fluid for a very long time. This jelly is essential for the billers' babies until the exoskeletons begin to harden. So basically, they would connect these hoses to their glands and spray them with very hot water if they didn't do what they were expected, and when that happened, they would not be able to produce pre-growth fluid and their babies would probably starve until the glands healed. Bubbleheads also did other not-so-nice things to billers, such as forgetting to feed them for days, weeks, and even months. They would use cookie cutter machines to carve art into the billers' soft bodies after they have molted, injecting them with chemicals that rendered them unable to molt once they get past a certain size, keeping them in tiny, cramped, cold garages, stealing their eggs, ripping off their antennae if they were too long, and debasing them. Now, before we get to debasing, you must remember what basing is. So, in Chapter 1, we explained that the way billers communicate is by basing, and they have this base organ on the underside of their bodies that allow them to make these very low frequency sounds that they communicate with. So debasing them, the bubbleheads did not like that the billers would base all night long. The billers' basing was extremely loud and it kept them up at night. So the bubbleheads just decided to simply tear out the billers' base organs. Billers can make other sounds other than basing, but the debasing process was, again, extremely painful. The way this process worked was that the bubbleheads would first use this bulldozer-like vehicle to flip the huge bugs upside down. And then they would use that bulldozer thing to move the creature into a garage-like area. Then these mechanical clamps would be used to hold the biller's legs in place so that they couldn't escape. Then the bubbleheads would use their razor-sharp claws to tear out the biller's base organs while the unfortunate biller is still conscious and fully alert. So they didn't use anesthesia. They would rip the base organs out of the billers while they're still conscious and unable to move. The bubbleheads' unfathomable acts of abuse did not stop at billers. These sphere-headed people also put slopsters through what was known as the beaking process. The bubbleheads removed the beaks of slopsters to make coins, which were used as currency in the bubblehead society. These slopsters were either raised by the dozen in cramped storage tanks where the only sources of food was each other. So basically the bubbleheads didn't feed them, so they had to eat each other while trapped in cramped, dark storage tanks. And by storage tanks, I don't mean an aquarium like octopuses. These tanks were pitch dark, so they didn't even get to see the sun, or Bea, which is the star. Or they were wild caught. The beaking process involved putting the slopsters through machines that used these giant clamps to hold their tentacles apart so they couldn't move, and then these mechanical tweezers would be used to literally rip their beaks out. Although the beaks can grow back, this process is, once again, extremely painful, and it was done without anesthesia. If the bubbleheads' billers refused to move, or they took too long to move when transporting goods, the bubbleheads would often pull the biller's antennae extremely hard, oftentimes to the point of disconnecting the nerves attached to them. They also had other punishments for disobedient billers. These included extremely long periods of food deprivation. The bubbleheads believed that lack of food was a great motivator. Waiting until the billers molt and then viciously beating them while the shells are still soft. Basically post-molt beating. Beating does not work on a creature with an armored shell, so the solution was to wait until they molted and then beat them afterwards. They even had an old saying for this. Don't beat the beast's hard head. Wait till it sheds. As you can see, these bubbleheads are a piece of work. But it was on one beautiful day that the bubbleheads decided to have their annual Best Bugs pageant. Whoever had the best billers would get 6,000 algars, which are the coins that they used made from the slopsters' beaks. Also, they would get fancy clothes made from the freshly removed skins of their finest leech. The billers were divided into two groups. There were the pet grade and the transportational billers. Pet grade billers were the billers that were injected with these anti-molting agents, which means that after they get to 15 inches, they cannot molt anymore. These were used as house pets. These were the first ones to be used in the pageant, while the larger billers were being kept in large, very cramped glass boxes until it was their turn for their owners to display them to the judges at the Best Bugs pageant. There was thousands of billers in the contest. Most of them were in very bad condition. There were billers that had their exoskeletons painted different colors. Billers with the plates or segments of their shells glued together to make them look more smooth. Billers with antennae and or legs missing. There were ones with symbols and shapes carved into their shells for aesthetics. The billers that had huge leaking cracks in their shells from being in these machines that forcefully squeeze the jelly out of them. The bubbleheads use this jelly in many different foods recipes, and they even drank the jelly itself like we eat milk, drink milk. There were even billers that were so poorly cared for that when they arrived at the pageant, they were on the verge of dying. Few were in a healthy state. Few were in a remotely healthy state. But there was one biller that was not as bad off as many others. The bubbleheads called him Beto. Beto was really, really big. He was a staggering 26 feet in length, and he tipped the scales at over 9 tons, much larger than any of the others in the herd. He was somehow able to live to the ripe old age of 600 years. He had dents on his exoskeleton from being chained up for centuries straight. He wasn't even unchained to molt. You heard that right. He literally had to molt while having chains wedged between the plates of his exoskeleton and all of his legs and antennae, and all of his legs shackled. Beto had gotten a very bad reputation from the bubbleheads due to his habit of kicking, scratching, basing, and trying to bite the crane that they used to load the billers into their carriages. For the pageant, the bubbleheads had to have the cranes replaced and fixed several times over because of Beto. It was on this day that Beto was being kept in a big glass box while the pet grade billers were being displayed in the contest. While no one was looking, he started to struggle and bang on the glass with his big, sharp, mantis-like front leg. It was during this process that the glass started to crack a little bit, so he banged on the glass even more. He banged on this glass over and over and over and over and over until all of the glass shattered, and the tank that he was being kept in was no more. It was then that Beto escaped, and when all the other billers saw how easy it was to break glass, they did the same. They had all broken free from their glass confines, and when they did, Beto let out, who was the leader of the herd, let out a very loud and booming bass. It was as if Beto was signaling something to the rest of the herd. They then went on a rampage throughout the whole Bubblehead village. They destroyed everything in their path. They broke glass, they bulldozed through buildings, and they tore up all the decorations that were present at the pageant. It was like a stampede of raging elephants. If elephants had shells as hard as metal, razor-sharp front legs, and could run at 60 miles per hour. By the time the Bubbleheads could realize that all their billers had escaped, it was way too little and far too late. They were no match for these 20-foot-long, 6-ton pillbugs, and the Bubbleheads could not outrun the billers, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop these hard-shelled beasts. The entire village was an ear-shattering, non-stop barrage of basing, breaking glass, the scuttling of many legs, and the terrified screams of these round-headed people. The billers were upon them. The billers were upon the Bubbleheads, attacking with their full power and no mercy. With their billers' razor-sharp front legs, the Bubbleheads were swiftly and viciously and effortlessly scraped and torn to pieces. Scraped, torn to pieces, and they were trampled. Now here's the thing, if you were getting trampled by billers, they weigh several tons, like an elephant almost, but they don't have feet in the same way as, say, an elephant. Rather than elephant-like feet, their legs end in sharp points, like the feet of a crab. The Bubbleheads were not being crushed. they were being skewered and stabbed to death by every one of those 20 legs crawling over them. By the time the base bugs, which is another term for the billers, were done with their spree of death and destruction, all that was left was a trail of ruins, broken glass, and purple liquid, that violet globe in blood. And that was where their party ended. The billers then skittered off into the forest, never to be seen again. Those of the bubbleheads that escaped, they were all alone, and most of them became prey for the various Abigailian predators. For all intents and purposes, they are extinct. There might be some of them far off in the forest somewhere, undiscovered, because Abigalia is 3 times the size of Asia. But for all intents and purposes, they're no more. They had a lifespan of 150 to 250 years. And that is where we pretty much bring this to an end. And I hope you enjoy, and thanks for watching, and have a nice night. Sleep tight. Don't let the ablapods bite.